Coronavirus crisis has reminded us of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's track record of prioritizing issues benefiting the free market over the working class.
And her let them eat cake moment seems to be racking up right now. So that's in part why Shahid Buttar, he's running to replace her in California's 12th district. Shahid joins us now via Skype to talk about his campaign. For the second time, Shahid, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Welcome back. Good to see you.
Likewise. Great to see you both, too.
Of course. Shahid, we first want to begin with your reaction to something that the speaker just said on CNN this morning, saying she is quite satisfied with the way that Joe Biden and his campaign have handled Tara Reade's sexual assault allegations against her. I mean, are you satisfied with Speaker Pelosi's reaction to that moment?
Far from it. You know, I wish that the political culture would be as comfortable as Speaker Pelosi might be. But exactly the fear here and the concern is that because Tara Reade's allegations towards former Vice President Joe Biden haven't been widely shared, it's basically like a ticking time bomb that could very easily cost the election. And the concern is the inconsistency of Democrats that claim when convenient to believe women and when inconvenient, they run the other way. And I would describe this as a failing as much of the institutional media landscape as I would of the corporate institutional Democratic Party. Many of us supported other nominees precisely because we recognize that Biden will struggle to win, even without, frankly, sexual assault allegations. Just given his history, he's so conservative. He's the closest thing the Democratic Party has to a Donald Trump. And that's precisely why I think he's going to struggle to win an election.
Shahid, obviously Speaker Pelosi has been one of the most important, most influential leaders in terms of shaping the response to the coronavirus crisis, both on the health front, but even, more so on the economic front. What do you think that she has done well, and what areas have you been critical?
Great question. Thank you for that. In the interest of giving credit where due, I want to particularly note a few encouraging aspects of the various stimulus packages that have responded to the coronavirus pandemic. And the biggest among them is the expansion of unemployment insurance to include gig workers and self-employed people and students as well. That's a major, major step forward for labor rights. I give credit for that where due, particularly to Senator Bernie Sanders and the squad in Congress. Having said that, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi was willing to meet them halfway. And I appreciate that. It's somewhat out of character given her much longer standing and more consistent service to Wall Street. And we saw that also. For instance, at the same time that the coronavirus stimulus packages allowed a $1,200 one-time stimulus payment to some Americans, 40,000 millionaires got tax breaks of over $1 million. And I just want to contrast $1,200 for families struggling to deal with the costs of the pandemic. And just to be clear, $1,200 in San Francisco is kind of like 2 weeks' rent for the average one bedroom, right? So we're talking about 2 weeks of rent for a San Franciscan versus $1.5 million going to millionaires. And I see that as reflecting very much the same set of lopsided priorities that have driven Nancy Pelosi's legislative presence for decades.
And Shahid, let's speak to that. You're out there in the district. She's here in Washington. How is it connecting in the district there? As you said, $1,200. My sister lives in San Francisco. I know exactly how far that can go in that city and some of the downtown areas. Speak to how San Franciscan residents are doing at this time.
People are struggling, both here in San Francisco and around the country. I mean, this is not an isolated phenomenon. And I would look particularly at the cost of housing and how it impacts and is impacted by the pandemic. Even before the coronavirus, we had an urban housing crisis in cities across the United States in which Nancy Pelosi was particularly implicated. It has been long the case that corporate Democrats have refused to fund adequately provisions for affordable housing that long were established in the federal budget. She has presided over a historic collapse in federal support for affordable housing. And then with the pandemic, tomorrow is May 1st. A whole bunch of Americans, millions of Americans around the country are not sure how to pay for their housing costs, whether rents or mortgages. And one thing Congress has decidedly not done, which I would describe, frankly, as a no-brainer, is a relief package to allow the indefinite suspension, freezing and forgiving rent and mortgage payments. Representative Ilhan Omar has a bill that would do exactly that. I very strongly support it. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has not. And that bill particularly reflects the difference between the interests of wealthy landlords, like Nancy Pelosi, and the rest of us who are struggling to pay with the cost of housing, particularly during a time of economic and public health crisis.
Right. And Shahid, progressive, anti-establishment challengers such as yourself, I mean, in normal times, you would really rely on a sort of grassroots army, right, to make up with shoe leather and organizing what you may lack in big financial backers. How do you compensate for the loss of the ability to do that during the coronavirus crisis?
It has been a challenge, but it's one that we've had the opportunity to rise to. And I'm frankly grateful for the momentum that we've been able to establish. To your point, on the one hand, knocking on doors, hosting campaign events, that was a big part of our campaign that got us through the primary. And I'm excited to be the first Democrat to ever face Nancy Pelosi in a November election, retooling our campaign for the current setting to respond to the epidemic and the inability to do those traditional tactics without putting people at risk has really forced us onto the phones and forced us online. So at the same time, for the first month after the pandemic hit, we suspended voter outreach more or less entirely and focused our staff and volunteers on wellness checks. So calling community members to make sure they knew where they could get a free meal, make sure they knew how to access the various benefits programs that the city and the state had made available. And at the same time that we were checking in on community members, we were building the digital tools to scale our phone banking operation, which is now in full swing. So we have hundreds of people on the phones voting, reaching San Francisco voters to promote our campaign. We expect that number to grow to thousands. And I'll just make this point. When we look at phone banking and its demonstrated efficacy in the past, I and many, millions of Americans around the country were making calls for Senator Bernie Sanders over the last, years. And in that context, we often had just a few weeks to reach entire states. We still have 6 months left, and our district is no bigger than a single city. So we have plenty of time, we have plenty of hands, and we have the tools now to reach San Francisco voters, even during the shelter-in-place period. And we're looking forward to liberating the seat come November.
Well, we'll be watching here, Shahid. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate the update.
Thank you, Shahid.
Always
Good to see you.
Thank you. Likewise. Keep up the great work.
We will. Next on Rising, union and non-union workers of some big companies, they plan to walk off the job tomorrow. We're going to tell you who they are and what they want. That's when Rising continues.